I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat as I watched the flames consume my wedding gown. The delicate ivory fabric that had taken months of planning, countless fittings, and an almost obsessive attention to detail, was now a charred, smoldering wreck. The satin that once shimmered in the light now curled and melted, leaving only remnants of what was supposed to be the most beautiful dress I would ever wear. Standing in front of me, her eyes wide with triumph, was Margot Pierce, my soon-to-be mother-in-law. She held the lighter in her manicured hand, her fingers tight around it as if she had just done something monumental, her face twisted with a mixture of rage and satisfaction, as though she had just won some sort of battle. "You really thought you'd marry my son?" she hissed, her voice rising with hysteria. "Now you can't, can you?" The words stung, cutting through the shock and confusion that were flooding my mind. My entire wedding, everything I had worked so hard for, was going up in flames, and all I could do was watch. "I told you I don't want someone like you in this family," she continued, her voice trembling with a glee that made my stomach churn. "Jason needs someone who understands our world, someone who belongs here. Not a nobody from the wrong side of town." I glanced at the wreckage beneath my feet, the melted fabric that had once been my dream gown. The thought of the time, money, and effort spent to make it perfect seemed trivial now, insignificant compared to the chaos that was unfolding in front of me. My bridesmaids, Tara, Emily, and Grace, stood frozen, their faces pale, their lavender dresses like colorful ghosts against the scene of destruction. "Margot," I said, my voice far steadier than I felt as I reached for my phone. "You have no idea what you've just done." Her laugh echoed in the room, brittle, sharp, and full of arrogance. "What I've done? I've saved my son from making the biggest mistake of his life. You think a degree from some community college and a job at a local agency make you worthy of a Pierce? Please. You're not even close. Jason deserves someone like Jessica Montgomery, someone with the right pedigree. Her father owns half of this city." My fingers hovered over my phone screen, my thoughts already racing. I could feel the tension rising, a knot tightening in my stomach. But there was no panic in my heart. I was done letting her think she had the upper hand. Slowly, I pressed a button and watched as Margot's expression shifted from smug confidence to confusion. "What is that?" she demanded, her voice faltering. I turned the screen toward her, not saying a word, and let her see it for herself. A live feed of the wedding space, elegant white chairs, the floral arch, the polished floors of the ballroom. The live stream that had been running since the first guests arrived. The camera shifted, and for a moment, I saw my own bridal suite, a full view of the chaos, with Margot at the center of it all. There she was, holding the lighter, looking like the villain she truly was. The room seemed to hold its breath as Margot's face went white. The triumphant smirk that had been on her lips vanished, replaced by a look of dawning horror. What is this? Turn it off!" she screeched, her voice higher now, panicked. She lunged forward, but I stepped back, holding the phone out of her reach. "No, Margot," I said, my voice cool and calm despite the chaos around me. "This is your reality now. This is what you've just done. You've destroyed my wedding dress, and everyone who's watching knows exactly what you said about me, about my family." Margot looked like she was about to explode. "You set me up," she accused, her words slashing through the air. "You planned this, didn't you? You wanted to ruin everything, to make me look like a fool." I raised an eyebrow. "I didn't burn my own wedding dress, Margot. You did that all on your own." Behind me, Jessica, my bridesmaid, had rushed to open a window, the smoke from the burnt gown now thickening in the room. My heart raced, but my mind was clear. The wedding was still happening. Maybe not in the way I had planned, but it would happen. Margot wasn't finished, though. "This wedding is off," she continued, waving her hand dismissively as though she could erase everything with a simple gesture. "I'll just tell everyone you got cold feet. Jason will be upset for a while, but he'll understand. Eventually." I glanced at my phone again, feeling the cool edge of my resolve settling in. "Are you sure about that?" I asked, a small smile curling at the edges of my lips. Margot's eyes darted to the phone. Her face went an even paler shade of white when she realized what she was seeing. The live stream, showing the wedding guests gathered in their seats, all of them looking at the screen that had just captured her moment of glory. Her face, her words, her actions on full display for everyone to see. I turned the phone back to Margot. The wedding's still happening, but now everyone can see just who you really are. I pressed the button again, sending a message to my sister, who was overseas, and Jason's grandparents in Florida. As I did, I could hear the murmuring growing louder in the background, the voices of the guests catching on to what had just transpired. Margot's expression was one of pure panic. "Turn it off," she demanded, her voice low and dangerous now, as if she could force me into submission with her power. "No, Margot," I said quietly, my gaze unwavering. "I think it's time you take a moment to consider your next move." Margot's eyes were wide with disbelief, her chest rising and falling with rapid breaths, as she glanced from the phone in my hand to the faces of my bridesmaids, then back to the charred remains of my wedding dress. She had expected me to break, to lose control, but instead, I stood tall, the remnants of my gown at my feet, the live stream still broadcasting her every movement to the waiting audience. Her mask of composure was beginning to crack. "You really thought you could get away with this?" I said, my voice steady despite the raw anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "You thought you could destroy my life, my dreams, with a match and a tantrum?" Margot laughed, but it was a hollow, desperate sound. "What, you're upset?" she sneered. "It's just a dress, Emma, and I'm doing what's best for Jason. He doesn't need someone like you, not from your background." Her words were laced with venom, but she was losing her grip. I could see the panic creeping in, the desperation to maintain control. "You're wrong," I said quietly, stepping closer to her. "Jason doesn't need someone like you either. You think you're protecting him, but you're suffocating him. He's an adult, Margot. He's not some puppet on your string." Her face flushed, the veins in her neck becoming visible as she gripped the lighter more tightly. "I'm not suffocating him, Emma. I'm saving him from a life of mediocrity, from settling. You think he wants a future with you? A woman who barely knows how to keep her life together, a woman who what, Margot?" I interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "Who doesn't fit your narrow view of what's acceptable? Who doesn't come from your privileged world? You think you have the right to decide who's worthy of your son?" Her lips trembled, her anger flaring as she stepped forward, but I didn't back down. "You don't get to define what's worthy, and you certainly don't get to define me." Margot opened her mouth, probably to shout something else, but the words died on her lips as she saw the look in my eyes. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was calm, calculated. I knew exactly how to handle this. "You know I don't need your approval," I continued, my voice low but firm. "Jason and I have already built a life together. You can burn my dress, you can tear me down, but you'll never tear us apart." Her eyes narrowed, her hand shaking as she tried to suppress the emotion rising inside her. "You think Jason is going to stand by you after all this? You're wrong. You're nothing to him." I felt my chest tighten, but instead of reacting with the hurt she was trying to provoke, I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "That's where you're wrong, Margot. Jason is my partner. He's my future. And you? You're just a relic of the past that we're both moving away from." Before she could respond, I noticed Jessica, one of my bridesmaids, glancing nervously between us. She had been quiet until now, but she stepped forward, her voice breaking the tension in the room. "Margot, this isn't the time or place for this. You've made your point, but everyone is watching. Everyone has been watching." Margot shot Jessica a glare, her face twisted in disgust. "They'll all forget this," she snapped. "They'll all forgive me. They'll realize I was only trying to protect Jason from making a mistake." I shook my head, a small, almost sad smile creeping onto my lips. "No, Margot," I said. "They won't forget, and neither will Jason. Not after this." Jessica stepped back, her eyes wide as she looked at me. The room seemed to hold its breath, the weight of the moment settling in. Then, I turned my phone screen back toward Margot, letting her see the live stream once again. "You think you can get away with this? Think again. The entire city is watching." Margot's expression faltered. She'd tried to manipulate Jason's life behind closed doors, but now there was no escape. Her secret, her cruelty, had been exposed for everyone to see. The guests were already talking, whispering about what they had just witnessed. The live stream had captured it all, her actions, her words, her betrayal, and there was no taking it back now. And that's when it hit her. This wasn't just about a wedding dress. This was about control. This was about her need to dictate every aspect of Jason's life, even his choices in love. But what she didn't realize was that Jason had already made his choice, and that choice was me. As the seconds ticked by, I felt a surge of something. Empowerment, perhaps. Something I hadn't expected to feel in the midst of all this chaos. I wasn't just a woman whose wedding dress had been ruined. I was a woman standing up for herself, standing up for her future. And nothing, not even Margot, could take that away. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left an entire room of journalists in stunned silence, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button. Because this story is just getting started. Margot's eyes flickered from the phone to the guests gathered outside, their whispers now growing louder. The tension in the room was palpable, like an electric charge building up with every second that passed. She took a step back, her fingers trembling as they released their grip on the lighter. Her breath was shallow, her mind racing, but there was no escape from the situation she had just dug for herself. For a moment I thought she might collapse, her ego shattered. But instead, she straightened up, trying to recover the remnants of her composure. "You can't do this, Emma," she spat, her voice wavering. "You think they'll believe you? You think they'll care about a wedding dress? You're nothing compared to Melissa, and you never will be." I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the urge to lash out, but I kept it in check. She was trying to provoke me, trying to get me to lose my cool, but I wasn't going to let her. Not today. "Margot, this isn't about Melissa. This isn't about you or your social circle," I said, my voice steady and calm. "This is about you trying to tear my life apart for no reason other than your own twisted need for control." She took a step forward, her eyes narrowing as if trying to intimidate me. "You really think Jason will stand by you after all this? After you humiliated me, after you exposed our family's dirty laundry to the world, you think he'll still marry you?" I met her gaze without flinching. "You think Jason is going to let you dictate who he loves? You've underestimated him, Margot. You've underestimated us." She scowled, but before she could respond, a voice from the doorway broke the silence. "Emma, what's going on in here? The guests are starting to ask questions." It was one of the venue coordinators, her face filled with uncertainty as she peered into the room. I could see the concern in her eyes, the weight of the situation pressing on her. I nodded briefly, letting her know that I was aware of the chaos outside, but I wasn't about to let it shake me. "Everything's fine," I said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "We're just having a little family disagreement. Nothing to worry about." Margot, still stewing in her anger, turned her gaze back to the phone in my hand. The live stream was still running, and she must have realized that it wasn't just Jason's family who would be seeing this disaster unfold. She could see the comments flashing across the screen, the increasing number of viewers who were watching this whole scene in real time. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in her eyes. "I'll make this right, Emma," she said, her voice now laced with desperation. "I'll tell everyone it was just a mistake, that I didn't mean to do it. Just turn the camera off. You don't know what you're doing." I shook my head slowly, holding the phone up higher so she could see the live feed clearly. The guests had begun to gather in the ceremony space, and the live stream was capturing their every movement. They were all waiting for the ceremony to begin, oblivious to the drama unfolding behind the scenes, but that wouldn't last, not anymore. "Turn it off," I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "No, Margot, you turned it on the moment you set fire to my dress. You can't take this back." Her eyes darted to the door as if searching for an escape. "You think Jason will forgive you for this?" she hissed. "You're ruining everything. This was supposed to be our day, not yours." I felt the anger rising again, but I forced it down. I had to stay in control, not just for myself, but for Jason. He deserved better than this chaos. He deserved to know the truth, and he deserved to know that I wouldn't let anyone, least of all his mother, tear us apart. "Jason is already on his way here," I said quietly, letting the words sink in. "And when he sees what you've done, when he sees how far you've gone to tear us apart, he'll understand. He'll see who you really are." Margot's face went pale, and she staggered back, her hand clutching at her throat as if trying to choke back her panic. "No," she whispered. "No, this can't be happening. "You're lying. Jason won't." I didn't give her a chance to finish. "He'll know everything, Margot. All of it. The live stream doesn't lie. It's all out there for the world to see." I gestured to the phone again, the screen flashing with comments as viewers weighed in, shocked by the unfolding scene. "Everyone's watching, and I won't let you get away with this. Not anymore." She opened her mouth to protest, but before she could say anything, the door to the bridal suite swung open with a crash, and Jason stormed in. His face was a mask of disbelief and fury as his eyes took in the scene before him. He saw me standing there, the phone in my hand, and the remains of my wedding dress scattered across the floor. But what he saw next made his jaw tighten with something darker, something I hadn't expected to see from him, not yet. He locked eyes with his mother. "Mom," Jason said, his voice so cold it sent a shiver down my spine. "Tell me I didn't just watch you burn Emma's wedding dress. Tell me this isn't real." Margot's face twisted, and for a moment I saw the mask of control slip completely. "No," Jason interrupted, his voice steady but full of a restrained fury that was unlike anything I'd ever heard from him. "No more lies, no more excuses. You've gone too far this time." He stepped closer to me, his eyes softening as he reached for my hand. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I had no idea she would do something like this. I never wanted you to see this side of my family." I squeezed his hand gently, trying to steady myself. "It's not about them, Jason. It's about us, you and me. And what we're going to do moving forward." Jason turned his attention back to his mother, and there was a hardness in his gaze now, something that had been missing before. "Margot," he said slowly, his voice laced with finality. "You've done enough. It's over. I'm done with this." Margot's mouth hung open in shock, her face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You can't be serious," she stammered. "You would choose her over your own mother?" Jason's eyes flashed with something that looked like a mix of pity and resolve. "Absolutely," he said firmly. "And you know what? I'm not going to stand by while you try to tear us apart anymore. You're not welcome here. Not anymore." The words landed like a heavy blow, and for a moment, Margot seemed to shrink before our eyes. She opened her mouth, trying to say something, but no words came out. Finally, she turned and stormed out of the room, leaving Jason and me alone in the bridal suite. The door slammed behind her, and the silence that followed was deafening. But then my phone buzzed again with a new message, and the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The live stream was still running. The world was still watching. As the door slammed behind Margot, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. The room felt unnaturally still, as if the world itself had paused, waiting for us to react. Jason's hand was still in mine, and I could feel the warmth of his touch grounding me, anchoring me in the present. But as the silence stretched, the weight of the situation slowly began to creep back in. The wedding dress, the live stream, the destruction of everything I had worked so hard to build. It was all hanging in the air, thick and heavy, like smoke that wouldn't dissipate. Jason's face was etched with regret, his brows furrowed as he glanced at me, then at the wreckage on the floor. "Emma," he said, his voice low, hesitant. "I don't even know what to say. This is beyond anything I ever imagined." I squeezed his hand, forcing a smile, though my heart was racing. "Don't apologize," I said firmly, but with a soft edge to my voice. "This isn't your fault. You didn't do this." Jason looked at me, searching my face as if trying to figure out how I was holding it together. "But I should've." "No," I interrupted gently. "You should have never had to deal with this in the first place. This is on Margot, not you." I paused, taking a deep breath. "We can still get married today. Nothing's changed except the dress, and that's not what matters." His gaze softened, and he gave me a small nod. "I don't want you to think I'm not here for you. I'll stand by you, no matter what happens next." I looked down at the blackened remnants of my dress, the once beautiful fabric now reduced to a pile of ashes. I could feel the weight of the moment, the heartbreak of losing my dream gown, but strangely, a part of me felt something else, something I hadn't expected to feel. The dress was gone, yes, but the wedding was still here. The ceremony was still going to happen, and I was still going to marry Jason. But how? How could we possibly move forward after everything that had happened? The live stream. Margot's cruelty, the guests who were now fully aware of the disaster unfolding behind the scenes. I glanced at my bridesmaids, who had been standing silently, watching the scene unfold. Tara, Emily, and Grace were frozen, but I could see the concern in their eyes. They wanted to help, but what could they do? What could any of us do in the face of all this chaos? I stood up straighter, feeling a surge of determination. This wasn't how the day was supposed to go, but it was how the day was going to go. I wasn't going to let Margot win. I wasn't going to let her dictate the story of this wedding. "Okay," I said, my voice steady and commanding. "Here's the plan." Jason's head snapped toward me, his eyes searching mine. "What do you mean?" I glanced at my bridesmaids who were now gathered around me, waiting for direction. "We're going to finish this wedding. We're going to make it happen no matter what. But we need to act fast. We don't have time to dwell on what's been lost. We need to focus on what's still ahead." Tara stepped forward, her hands on her hips. "Okay, what do we need to do?" I took a deep breath, running through the details in my mind. First, we need to get the guests out of the ceremony space. They're probably all waiting, confused about what's going on. We need to clear the room, and then we'll figure out the next step. They're expecting a wedding, and they're going to get one. "All right," Emily said, her voice full of resolve. "I'll go talk to the venue staff and tell them to move everyone out of the room for a bit. We'll clear the chairs, make space." "Good," I said, nodding. "And Grace, you'll help Emily with that. We'll need the space cleared and we'll need to move quickly." I turned back to Jason, who was still watching me, his face filled with uncertainty. "I need you to trust me, Jason. We can still do this. It's just going to look different than we planned, but it will still be our wedding." Jason met my gaze, his expression softening. "I trust you, Emma. Whatever you need, I'm with you." I could feel the weight of his words, and something in me steadied. It was as if the storm inside of me had found its center, and I knew what needed to be done. This wasn't just about getting through the wedding, it was about reclaiming the day. It was about making a statement. I glanced down at the wreckage of my dress again. "This isn't what I imagined," I muttered, mostly to myself. "But it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be us." Jason gave me a quick, understanding nod. "You're right," he said quietly. "It's about us. It's always been about us." I smiled at him, a surge of warmth flooding my chest. This was what I had fought for. This was what mattered. Not the dress, not the chaos. It was the two of us, together. But now, there was one final obstacle, the dress. The dress that had been ruined. The dress I had spent months perfecting, but that wasn't the end of the story. "We need a backup dress," I said, the words suddenly coming to me in a rush. "I have to find something. Anything that will work. It won't be the dress I imagined, but it'll be something I can wear. And I'll walk down that aisle." Jason's eyes widened, and I saw a flicker of disbelief. "You really think we can find something on such short notice? It's not like we can just run to a store." "Trust me," I said, smiling at him. "I've got a backup plan. I always do." Tara and Emily were already on the phone, talking to the venue's staff, while Grace was making arrangements with the photographer to capture the changes. Everyone was in motion, pulling together like an army of determined women who weren't going to let a little thing like a burnt wedding dress ruin a perfectly good day. And as for the dress, I wasn't going to let that be the thing that stopped me either. I called up a designer I had worked with in the past, someone I knew would have something in her studio that would fit the bill. "Eliza," I said, my voice firm. "Do you have any sample dresses available? It doesn't have to be perfect. I just need something that will work." "Don't worry, Emma," Eliza said, her voice warm but with a touch of urgency. "I'll get something over to you. It'll be there in 30 minutes. I hung up, feeling a small spark of hope flicker inside me. 30 minutes. That was all the time we had, and I knew we could make it work. I looked at Jason, who was now standing beside me, watching me with a mixture of awe and admiration. "I'll be ready, Jason," I said softly. "I'm going to make sure we still have our moment. It might not be the way we planned it, but I promise you, it'll be just as special." Jason smiled, the tension finally easing from his face. "I know you will." And with that, the plan was set into motion. The wedding wasn't over. It wasn't ruined. It was just beginning. And this time, no one, not even Margot, could take it away from us. The room was a whirlwind of motion, bridesmaids hustling back and forth, venue staff scrambling to adjust plans, and the air still thick with the remnants of the fire. But through it all, I remained focused. The dress had been destroyed, the live stream was still running, and Margot had made her exit, but I wasn't going to let any of it stop us. This wedding was still happening, and I was still going to walk down that aisle. I glanced at my phone again. Eliza had confirmed that the dress was on its way, 30 minutes. The clock was ticking, but I could already feel the resolve setting in. This wasn't just a fight for the wedding day anymore. This was a fight for everything I had worked for, everything Jason and I had built together, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Margot, destroy it. I turned to Jason, who was now standing at the center of the room, his eyes intense as he watched me. "Everything is going to be fine," I said, my voice steady despite the storm swirling around us. "We'll have the dress, we'll have the ceremony, and we'll have the moment we deserve." He nodded, but I could see the worry still lingering in his eyes. "I hate that this is happening," he said softly. "I never wanted you to go through any of this." I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "It's not about what we've lost, Jason," I said, meeting his gaze. "It's about what we're going to create from this. We're still going to have our day, and it's going to be just as perfect as we made it. We're going to make it ours, no matter what." The door to the bridal suite creaked open, and I turned to see Tara and Grace walking in, their faces full of determination. "Everything's cleared out of the ceremony space," Grace said, her tone businesslike. "We've got a few more minutes before we can start bringing everyone back in. You're ready, right?" I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "I will be." Just then, my phone buzzed again. Eliza had sent a message. "The dress is on its way. It's a perfect fit for you. It'll be there soon." Relief flooded through me, but there was no time to bask in it. I had to focus. We were on the verge of pulling this all together, and nothing was going to stop me now. "We're going to need a backup plan for the backup dress," I said, looking at Tara. "Do you remember the shoot we did last month with Eliza's designs? The ivory sheath with the lace overlay?" Tara's eyes lit up. "Of course, that one's perfect for you. And Eliza's dresses always fit like a glove." "Exactly," I said, smiling at her. "Call Eliza and ask her to bring it. We're going to make this work." Tara grabbed her phone and dialed Eliza, while Grace hurried to help move things around in the room. It felt like an orchestrated dance, each person knowing their role and executing it with precision. It wasn't about making it perfect, it was about making it happen. And we were all in sync. We were moving forward, step by step, making sure nothing else could derail us. I glanced at the door again, willing the dress to arrive, knowing every minute counted. The ceremony was waiting. The guests were waiting, and I was going to walk down that aisle, no matter what. The seconds dragged on. Every moment felt like an eternity. I could hear the low hum of voices from the other side of the door. The guests no doubt speculating about what had happened. I didn't care anymore. Let them talk. Let them wonder. This was about us. This was about me and Jason and the future we were building together. Tara reappeared, her face lighting up as she held her phone to her ear. "Eliza's on her way with the dress. It'll be here in 10 minutes. "Perfect," I said, my voice a little more confident now. "We have 10 minutes. Let's make them count." I turned to Jason, who had been watching me with a mix of awe and concern. "Jason, are you ready?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "This is it. We're going to do this. We're going to make it happen." He smiled at me, his eyes softening. "I'm with you, Emma. I've never been more ready." I could see it in his eyes, the resolve that mirrored my own. We were in this together, and no matter how many obstacles we faced, we would face them side by side. As if on cue, the door swung open again, and the venue coordinator stepped inside, her face filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. "The dress is here," she said quickly. "The delivery just came in." I could feel my heart rate spike, but I pushed the nervous energy aside. I didn't have time for nerves. The moment I had been waiting for was finally here. The dress was simple, elegant, and perfect. It wasn't the gown I had envisioned, but it was mine now. I slipped into it, feeling the lace against my skin, the way it hugged my body just right. There was no grandeur in the dress. It wasn't about opulence or perfection. It was about strength. It was about resilience. And it was about me. I stood in front of the mirror, taking a moment to appreciate the transformation. The dress wasn't a replacement for my original vision. It was an embodiment of everything I had fought for, everything I had overcome, and it was mine. It was the dress that would carry me down the aisle toward my future with Jason. Jason entered the room, his eyes widening when he saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. His gaze softened as he took in the sight of me, the dress, the woman standing before him. His eyes traveled up to meet mine, and in that moment, I saw everything I needed to see. "Wow," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "You're stunning." I smiled, my heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you," I said softly, "but I'm not just stunning. I'm strong, and I'm ready." Jason's smile grew, a deep sense of pride lighting up his face. "You are. You always have been." The moment felt timeless, like a breath of fresh air after a storm. The weight of the day, of everything that had happened, seemed to lift as Jason took my hand, leading me toward the door. The ceremony was ready. The guests were ready. And we were ready, together. The ceremony space was alive with energy. The guests, having been briefly sent out to wait while the chaos unfolded in the bridal suite, were now filtering back in, their murmurs growing louder as they found their seats. The elegant rows of white chairs, the floral arch that had been set up with such care, the soft music playing in the background. Everything was still in place, but nothing felt the same anymore. Not after everything that had happened. And yet there was something in the air now, something that had shifted, a quiet, unspoken tension, but not the kind that came from uncertainty or fear. No, this was a different kind of tension. It was anticipation. It was the energy of a moment that had been earned, fought for. As I stood behind the closed doors of the ceremony space, my hand gripping Jason's, I felt a deep sense of calm wash over me. The dress wasn't the one I had imagined, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, its elegance. It was a dress that reflected the strength I had found through this entire ordeal. Jason, standing beside me, squeezed my hand gently. "Are you sure you're ready?" he asked, his voice low, filled with sincerity and concern. I looked up at him, my heart swelling as I saw the deep love in his eyes. "I've never been more ready," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "Let's do this." The doors opened. The soft strains of the string quartet filled the air, and I could feel the weight of the moment settling in as I stepped forward. The guests, who had been talking amongst themselves, fell silent. Every eye in the room turned toward us, and for a brief moment time seemed to stop. I could hear the soft click of heels on the marble floor, the rustling of my dress, and the faint hum of anticipation. I could see Jason, standing at the altar, his face lit up with an expression that was a mixture of awe, love, and pride. His eyes were locked on me, and I could see the way his gaze softened as I made my way toward him. Every step felt like a victory. Not just a victory over Margot, or over the fire that had destroyed my dress, but a victory over doubt, over fear, over everything that had tried to keep us apart. And in that moment, as I walked toward Jason, I realized something. This wasn't just a wedding. It wasn't just a ceremony. This was our declaration. Our declaration that we were going to face everything together no matter what. That we would not be defined by the obstacles in our way, but by how we overcame them. When I reached the altar, Jason's smile widened, and he took my hands in his touch warm and grounding. His fingers were steady, despite everything that had happened. It was like the whole world was silent around us, as though everything else had faded into the background. "We made it," Jason whispered, his voice filled with wonder. I smiled, my heart full. Yes, we did. The officiant, a kind and gentle man, began to speak, his voice a steady rhythm that guided us through the ceremony. The words were familiar, but they felt different now. They felt more meaningful. Every vow, every promise was a reflection of everything we had already overcome. I could feel the eyes of the guests on us, and I knew they were witnessing something different too. They weren't just witnessing a wedding, they were witnessing resilience, determination, and love in its purest form. They were seeing a couple who had faced adversity and come out stronger on the other side, and I knew, deep in my heart, that this was the moment that mattered. not the dress, not the perfect ceremony. It was the love we shared, and the promise we were making to each other. As we exchanged vows, Jason's voice was strong, his words filled with emotion. "I promise to stand by you," he said, his eyes never leaving mine, "to fight for us, to fight for you, and to never let anything come between us, no matter what." The words felt like a vow not just to me, but to everything we had built, to the challenges we had faced and the ones we would continue to face. And when it was my turn, I squeezed his hands tightly, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "I promise to love you, to support you, and to never give up on us. Through the hard times and the easy ones, no matter what comes our way, I will always choose you." The words felt right, perfect even. They were a reflection of everything we had endured, and as I looked at Jason, I knew there was nothing that could tear us apart. We had already fought for this love, and now we were sealing it. As the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, a cheer erupted from the crowd, and I felt a surge of joy flood through me. We had made it. We had done it. Despite the chaos, despite the fire and the betrayal and the doubts, we had found our way to this moment, and nothing else mattered. Not the perfect dress, not the perfect ceremony, just the love we shared. Jason pulled me into his arms, his lips meeting mine in a kiss that was everything I had imagined and more. The crowd erupted into applause, and I heard the sound of phones clicking, people capturing the moment, but I didn't care. I was in Jason's arms, and that was all that mattered. As we pulled away from the kiss, I looked at him, my heart racing. "We did it," I whispered. "We sure did," Jason said, his smile wide and genuine. "I knew we could." And then, as if on cue, the camera shifted, and the live stream was showing us, the newlywed couple, standing in front of our guests. The room was filled with love, joy, and a sense of unity, but more than that, it was filled with the knowledge that we had fought for this, that we had stood up against everything that tried to tear us apart, and in the end, we had triumphed. Together. The ceremony was far from perfect. There had been mistakes, chaos, and moments of heartbreak, but in the end, those imperfections only made the day more meaningful. They made the vows we exchanged more powerful, more real, and as Jason and I walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, I couldn't help but smile. This was our day. This was our story, and no one, not even Margot, could take that away from us. The reception was everything I could have hoped for, and yet, nothing like what I had expected. The guests had begun to settle into their seats, but the air was thick with anticipation, buzzing with quiet conversations about the day's events. They were still digesting the whirlwind that had unfolded earlier, the fire, the dress, the confrontation with Margot, and now, here we were, husband and wife, standing before them. The room was decorated in the soft hues I'd envisioned, ivory, blush, and gold, but there was an unspoken understanding in the air, a recognition that the real story wasn't in the decor or the floral arrangements. It was in the moments that had brought us here, the chaos, the conflict, the love, and the strength that had held us together through it all. Jason and I stood for a moment at the entrance, letting the applause wash over us. The applause wasn't just for us, it was for everything we had overcome. I could feel the energy in the room shift as the guests processed the journey we'd just taken together. People were whispering, but this time it wasn't about the disaster of the dress, it was about the triumph, about the fact that we had made it through the storm. As we moved deeper into the ballroom, my eyes scanned the room. There were familiar faces, my family, my friends, Jason's relatives. But among them, there were also strangers, journalists. A few had clearly found their way into the event after hearing about the live stream. I could see their cameras pointed at us, their lenses following our every move. I had a brief moment of hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty. The world had watched us. The world knew about the fire, about the live stream, about everything that had happened. There would be no hiding it now. But then, I looked at Jason, and his eyes met mine with a quiet strength that calmed every nervous thought that tried to surface. We had faced the worst together, and we were still here. The reception began in the usual way, dancing, speeches, toasts. But there was an underlying difference now. There was an energy in the room that hadn't been there before. The usual formalities had taken a back seat to something more genuine, more authentic. The guests, some of whom had once been part of Margot's carefully curated world, were no longer bound by her invisible rules. In fact, as the evening wore on, it became clear that something profound had shifted. The tension that had once filled the air had dissolved, replaced by an openness, a warmth that hadn't existed before. I caught sight of Jason's father, Richard, standing at the far end of the room, speaking to a small group of people. He was deep in conversation, but the lines of his face had softened. There was something different in the way he was engaging with the people around him, an openness that hadn't been there before. I couldn't help but smile. This wasn't just about me and Jason. It was about breaking free from the chains that had bound his family for years. And it was about embracing the future we were building together. Jason and I made our way toward the head table, where we were greeted by our closest friends and family. Tara and Grace, my two bridesmaids, were sitting together, their faces bright with excitement. "You guys look incredible," Tara said, her voice full of admiration. "It's like you've just been through the most insane wedding disaster and came out even stronger." I laughed, shaking my head. "I guess we did, but it's over now. And we're here, together." Grace leaned forward, her eyes wide. "Seriously though, you two are amazing. The way you handled everything, everyone's talking about how you stayed calm, how you didn't let her win." I met Jason's gaze, a slow smile spreading across my face. "We didn't let her win," I said quietly. "We didn't let anyone win. We fought for this." Jason reached for my hand, his fingers gently brushing mine. "We always will," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. The evening wore on, the dance floor filling with laughter and music. But even as the celebrations continued, I could feel the eyes of the guests on us, their admiration palpable. People were talking, yes. But this time, it wasn't about the disaster. It wasn't about Margot's cruelty or the fire that had ruined my dress. It was about the way we had risen above it all. The way we had turned a catastrophe into something powerful, something beautiful. As we danced together, Jason's arms wrapped around me, the world seemed to fade away. The noise, the chatter, the cameras, it all faded into the background. It was just him and me, moving in sync, as if the rhythm of the music was the pulse of our hearts. I leaned my head against his shoulder, closing my eyes for a brief moment, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my ear. "Do you think they'll ever stop talking about it?" I whispered. Jason chuckled softly, his lips brushing the top of my head. "Maybe, but I don't really care." "You don't?" I asked, lifting my head to look at him. "No," he said, his voice full of conviction. "Because it's our story now. It's ours. And I don't care how anyone else spins it. We know the truth. We know what happened, and we know what we overcame." I smiled, my heart swelling with love for him. I couldn't have said it better myself. As we continued to dance, I noticed something remarkable happening. The room had shifted. The guests who had once kept their distance were now mingling with my family, with my friends. The old divisions, those lines that had once existed between Jason's family and mine, had all but disappeared. The people who had once sat at the edges of the room were now stepping forward, engaging in conversation, laughing, sharing stories. The truth had a way of doing that, I realized. It had a way of breaking down walls, of forcing people to see beyond their preconceived notions. What Margot had hoped would be a wedge between us had only brought us closer. The lies she had spun, the schemes she had plotted, had only served to reveal who was truly on our side and who wasn't. As the night wore on, I found myself surrounded by people who were genuinely happy for us. My friends, Jason's family, even some of the distant relatives who had once been skeptical of me. They were all there, supporting us, celebrating us, and I couldn't help but think of how far we had come. But the real moment of reckoning came when Jason's aunt, Diane, approached us during dinner. She leaned down to speak privately, her expression filled with sincerity. "Richard told me what happened today," she said softly, "and he wanted me to apologize on behalf of the family. He's deeply ashamed of what Margot did, but he also wanted you to know that he stands with you both. He's proud of you." Jason's face softened, and he reached out to take her hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. "It means a lot to us." Diane nodded, her eyes filled with empathy. "You two are stronger than anyone gives you credit for, and you deserve the world. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As she walked away, Jason turned to me, his eyes full of emotion. "I think today was a turning point for us, for my family, for everything." I nodded, my heart swelling with gratitude. It was. And we're just getting started. The night continued, filled with laughter, music, and celebration. But even as we celebrated, I knew that we had already won. We had already proven to ourselves and to everyone around us that love, when fought for, could overcome anything, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The following days after the wedding were a blur of media attention, messages of congratulations, and the kind of support that felt like a warm blanket, comforting me after the storm. Jason and I basked in the joy of finally starting our life together, free from the shadows of Margot's interference. But while we were busy embracing our future, someone else was wrestling with the consequences of their actions. It wasn't just the guests at the wedding who had witnessed Margot's outburst. Word had spread fast, especially with the viral nature of the live stream. What had started as a local disaster quickly became a national story, splashed across news outlets, social media, and even viral wedding blogs. And there, in the middle of it all, was Margot. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. What she had done wasn't just damaging to me, it was damaging to Jason, to their family name. But I had no idea just how far she would go to try to salvage her crumbling control. It was the following weekend when Jason received the first text. It was from his father, Richard, and it wasn't a message anyone could ignore. "Meet me in the study. It's time we talk about your mother." I could feel the weight of those words settle heavily in my chest. The damage that Margot had caused was still rippling through the family, and it seemed like it was about to hit its peak. Jason and I had already discussed it briefly, but we knew that whatever conversation was happening now would mark a turning point for his family. When Jason returned after his conversation with his father, I could see the tension in his posture. He didn't speak immediately, but I could see the war brewing behind his eyes. The moment he sat down across from me, his face was a mix of disbelief and something darker, something that told me everything had escalated to a point he hadn't anticipated. "I don't even know where to start," he said, rubbing his temples. "Dad's beside himself. He says that what happened with Margot, that's the last straw. He's not sure how much longer he can protect her, especially with everything that's coming out in the press." "Does that mean she's out?" I asked quietly, not sure if I was ready for the answer. Jason hesitated, but I could see the answer written all over his face. "Not yet, but it's coming. There's no way this can go on much longer. And he says she's been locking herself in the guest house, refusing to speak to him. He's giving her the space to think, but at this point, he doesn't even know if he wants to try and fix things anymore." The weight of that hit me like a physical blow. For all the damage Margot had caused, for all the time she had undermined Jason's choices, there was still a part of him that had held on to hope that maybe, just maybe, she could be reasoned with. But this was different. Margot had taken it too far. "I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about it," Jason continued, his voice raw. "I love her, she's my mother. But everything she's done, it's like I don't even know who she is anymore. How can someone who's supposed to love me destroy my life like that?" I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. "You don't have to choose between us. I'm here for you, Jason. Always. And whatever happens with your mom, we'll face it together. You don't have to carry this alone." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine as if looking for some kind of reassurance. The burden of it all had been weighing so heavily on him, and I could see the exhaustion in his gaze. I wanted to take that pain from him to make it easier, but I knew I couldn't. All I could do was be there, just like he had been for me through everything. The conversation with his father had made it clear the family was divided, and Margot was on the losing side of it. But it wasn't just Jason's father who had begun to distance himself from her. It was the rest of the family too. One by one, people were backing away from her, seeing her for who she really was. The following days felt like an emotional roller coaster. Jason and I spent hours talking about what was going to happen next, about how to navigate the fallout, and what our future together might look like in the wake of everything that had occurred. But there was always this heavy silence whenever the topic of Margot came up. There were no easy answers, no clear path forward. Every conversation, every interaction, seemed to weigh heavier than the last. And then, finally, the phone call came. Jason's father, Richard, called to let us know that he was meeting with Margot again. The tension between them had been growing for days, and it seemed like the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. "I'm done trying to protect her," Richard had said. "I can't keep covering for the things she's done. She has to face the consequences of her actions." Margot had spent days holed up in the guest house, refusing to talk to anyone, but Richard had finally forced the confrontation. He needed to understand if there was any possibility of salvaging their relationship, and if not, then it was time for him to make the hardest decision of his life. Jason and I both knew what that meant. The emotional stakes were high, and it wasn't just about family dynamics anymore. It was about respect, trust, and accountability. And while Jason loved his mother, he knew, deep down, that this was a moment he couldn't ignore. Margot had burned too many bridges, destroyed too many relationships for him to turn a blind eye. A few hours after the call, Jason walked into our apartment, his face pale. "It's done," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's leaving. Dad told her to go. He's cutting ties with her." I could see the relief in Jason's face, but there was something else there too, something like grief. It was the loss of a relationship that had been so central to his life, a relationship that had shaped him into who he was. But it was also the knowledge that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them go. "You're sure?" I asked gently, though I could already see it in his eyes. He had made his peace with it. "Yeah," he said, his voice firm now. "It's over, and as much as it hurts, I think we're both better off without her controlling everything." I reached for him, pulling him into a hug. I knew how much it had hurt him to reach this point, how deeply he had loved his mother, despite everything. But I also knew that this was the right decision for him. For us. In the days that followed, we started to rebuild. Jason's relationship with his father, Richard, began to heal, though it would take time. But the rift between Jason and Margot wasn't something that could be easily repaired, not after everything that had happened. Still, it was a relief for both of us to know that the chapter with Margot's manipulation had finally come to a close. As I stood by Jason's side through it all, I couldn't help but feel proud of him. Proud of us. We had faced unimaginable challenges, but we had weathered them together. And no matter what happened with his family, I knew one thing for sure: our future was ours to shape. And no one could take that away from us. The days following the fallout with Margot were filled with reflection and quiet moments of healing. But there was one thing that remained unshakable: Jason and I were stronger than ever. The weight of the storm we had weathered was still fresh in my mind. But as the days passed, something incredible began to emerge from the wreckage. There was a clarity now, an undeniable sense of peace that had settled between us. Our relationship, once fragile and subjected to the whims of family drama, was now a solid foundation, something that could withstand any challenge life threw our way. And with that peace came the realization that we had reached a new beginning. We had fought for each other, for our love, and for the future we were building together. And now it was time to celebrate it. Not just the wedding, but everything that had led to this moment, the strength, the resilience, and the unwavering commitment we had shown one another. The venue, the Grand Pavilion, had been booked long before the chaos had unfolded, and the plans had initially revolved around the idea of a perfect, picture-perfect wedding. But now, everything was different. The pressure was gone. There was no need to chase perfection anymore. We were here. We had made it through. And this celebration wasn't just about a traditional reception. It was about us, about our journey. And we were going to make it ours, no matter what anyone expected. The night of the celebration was one of the most beautiful evenings of my life. The soft glow of the chandeliers, the gentle hum of laughter, and the low murmur of the guests' voices all blended into a background of warmth and joy. But more than that, the energy in the room was one of solidarity, of triumph over adversity. Our friends and family, the ones who had stood by us through thick and thin, had gathered to share in our joy. And even those who had once been unsure, who had doubted us, seemed to be basking in the glow of our love and resilience. Jason and I entered the ballroom hand in hand, and the applause that greeted us was not just for the newlyweds, but for everything we had overcome. It was as if the room itself was cheering for us, for our strength, our perseverance. I could see it in the faces of our friends, our family, pride, admiration, and perhaps even a little awe. We took our places at the head table, surrounded by the people who had been with us every step of the way. My bridesmaids, Tara, Grace, and Emily, were seated together, their faces radiating joy and warmth. Jason's father, Richard, was seated across from us, and though there was a tension in the air, there was also a new sense of understanding between us. We had all made it through something that had seemed impossible. And now, we were here, celebrating the fact that we had come out on the other side. The first toast came from my father. His voice was steady, but there was a softness to it as he raised his glass. "To Emma and Jason," he began, his gaze moving between us, "for showing us all what true love really means, for fighting for each other, and for finding strength in the face of adversity." The room fell silent for a moment, as everyone took in his words. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I held them back. My father's support had been unwavering throughout everything. He had been my rock, just as Jason had been. And now standing here, I realized that this was what it was all about. Family, love, support, the kind of unshakable foundation that no one, not even Margot, could destroy. As the evening wore on, the mood lightened, the music swelled, and the guests began to mingle, laughing and dancing. The energy in the room shifted from reflective to celebratory, and I couldn't help but smile. This was our night. This was our moment. We had survived everything, and now we were truly living. The dance floor opened up, and Jason took my hand, leading me out to the center. As we swayed together, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't the wedding I had once dreamed of. It wasn't the fairy tale I had envisioned. But it was real. It was ours. And it was perfect. I looked up at him, my heart full, and saw the same quiet joy reflected in his eyes. "We did it," I whispered. Jason smiled, his grip on me tightening as we danced. "Yeah, we did, and I couldn't have done it without you." I leaned in closer, pressing my cheek against his, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart beneath mine. "We did it together," I whispered back. As the song ended and the music shifted to something livelier, the room came alive again. Laughter rang out, glasses clinked, and the sound of people enjoying the night surrounded us. But in that moment, standing in Jason's arms, it felt as if the whole world had faded away, leaving just the two of us in our own little bubble of happiness. Later in the evening, I was pulled away from the dance floor by a familiar voice. It was Richard, Jason's father. He had been quiet most of the evening, but now there was something in his eyes, something soft, something genuine. "May I have a word?" he asked, his voice filled with an emotion I hadn't seen from him before. I nodded, following him to a quieter corner of the ballroom. He looked at me for a moment, as if weighing his words, and then finally spoke. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, his voice rough, "for everything that's happened, for not seeing what was really going on, for letting Margot manipulate me into believing she was doing what was best for Jason. I see now that I was wrong." I was taken aback by his words. Richard had always been the quiet, steadfast patriarch of the family, but now, standing before me, he seemed different, more open, more human. "You don't need to apologize," I said softly. "What matters is that you're here now, that you're with us, that we're moving forward." Richard nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "You're the daughter I never had, and Jason is lucky to have you." I could feel the weight of his words sink in. In that moment, I realized just how much had changed. Not just between Jason and me, but within his family as well. The walls that had once stood between us, between me and Jason's parents, were slowly coming down. And it felt like we were starting anew, a true beginning. One that wasn't built on preconceptions or control, but on love, respect, and understanding. As the night went on, I found myself surrounded by our closest friends, my bridesmaids and family, all of us sharing stories and laughter. The sense of community in that room was overwhelming, and it felt like everything had come full circle. The day that had started in turmoil, filled with uncertainty and fear, had ended in celebration. The resilience we had shown, the love we had fought for, had brought us to this moment. Later in the evening, I stood at the edge of the balcony, gazing out at the stars. Jason joined me, his hand slipping into mine. "Ready for the next chapter?" he asked, his voice low but filled with excitement. I smiled, feeling the weight of everything that had happened and everything that was yet to come. "More than ready," I said, squeezing his hand. "Let's write it together." And as we stood there, looking out at the horizon, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. Because no matter how many obstacles came our way, no matter how many challenges we faced, we had already proven that we could overcome them, together. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Jason and I settled into a new rhythm. Life was no longer about surviving the chaos that had once consumed us. It was about embracing the peace that had finally settled into our hearts. What had started as an impossible struggle, filled with obstacles and betrayals, had transformed into a love story that no one, not even Margot, could tear apart. The wedding, which had been the scene of so much turmoil, had become a symbol of something much more profound: resilience. And as we moved forward into our life together, we carried that strength with us, knowing that no matter what the world threw at us, we could face it with our heads held high. Our honeymoon in the Maldives was everything we had dreamed of and more. For the first time in what felt like forever, we could breathe freely, away from the press and the constant whirlwind of family drama. It was just the two of us, surrounded by the vast ocean and the soft whispers of the wind, with no one else around to dictate how we should live our lives. It was perfect. But even in paradise, I couldn't escape the lessons that had been hard-earned. The lessons about love, trust, and standing up for what was right. In the quiet moments, when the world was still and the only sound was the crashing of waves against the shore, I found myself reflecting on everything that had brought us here. The challenges, the heartbreak, the triumphs, it all led us to this place of peace. And it was in those moments that I realized something important. Love wasn't about avoiding the hard times. It was about facing them head-on, together. Jason and I spent our days exploring the island, swimming in crystal-clear waters, and soaking in the beauty of the world around us. But it wasn't just the beauty of the landscape that took my breath away. It was the beauty of the life we were now building. Every conversation we had, every quiet moment shared between us, was a reminder that we had something rare, something precious, and it was something worth fighting for. As the days passed, the media frenzy around our wedding began to die down. The news stories, the viral videos, the interviews, all of it faded into the background. But the support we received from people, strangers even, never stopped. Messages from women who had faced similar challenges, messages from people who admired our strength, flooded in. It was overwhelming, but also humbling. I realized then that our story wasn't just ours anymore. It was something bigger, something that could inspire others to stand up for themselves, to fight for the love they deserved. And in the midst of it all, I could see the impact it had on Jason. The man I had married had always been strong, but now, after everything we had gone through, there was an undeniable shift in him. He was more certain, more confident. The man who had once struggled to stand up to his mother, the man who had been pulled in so many directions by family expectations, had finally found his voice. And with that voice, he had made his choice. He had chosen me. We returned from the Maldives with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to take on whatever came next. But we both knew that the real journey had only just begun. Our relationship, now stronger than ever, was ready to face the future. We were no longer afraid of the challenges that lay ahead. We knew we could face them together, just as we had always done. As we settled into our life back home, we focused on the things that truly mattered: our careers, our dreams, and our future as a family. We were building something that no one could tear down, because we had built it together from the ground up. The past was behind us, but the lessons we had learned from it would guide us for the rest of our lives. Jason and I often talked about the future, about the family we wanted to build, the life we wanted to create. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. Every step we took together felt like another victory, another testament to the strength of our bond. There were still moments when the past would rear its ugly head, when memories of Margot's cruelty would come rushing back. But in those moments, we reminded ourselves of what we had already overcome. And we reminded ourselves of the love that had carried us through it all. That love wasn't just a feeling, it was a force. It was the foundation of everything we had built, and everything we would continue to build. We were no longer the same people we had been when we first met. We were stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. The challenges we had faced had only made us more resilient, and the love we had for each other had become a source of strength, something that nothing could destroy. And so, as we looked toward the future, we did so with confidence, with hope, and with the knowledge that no matter what life threw at us, we would always have each other. Our love was the anchor that held us steady in the storm, the light that guided us through the darkness. As we continued to build our life together, I knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning. The challenges would come, but so would the triumphs. And no matter what, we would face them hand in hand.